Today, we're going to continue on with our distress tolerance module. So we are going to start with our opening mindfulness. Then we'll review last week's skill. I'll go into teaching our 2 new skills for today. So for today's mindfulness, I'm going to invite you to grab some sort of writing utensil and a scrap piece of paper. Maybe you have a journal nearby, a blank piece of paper, even a Post-it note will do. And then some sort of writing utensil. So pen, colored pencil, whatever you have on hand. Okay, so I'm going to pull up a whiteboard. And we are going to do a little journal, like a prompted journal exercise to help us better understand. Hopefully that comes up here. Okay, perfect. To better understand who we are as people, what we need, what we want, what we will do, what we want to do. So you're gonna see a series of prompted sentences, and you're gonna go ahead and fill in the blank. So take some time to complete this. It's probably best to pause the video so you have this up on your screen, but really take some time to be mindful in your responses here. All right. So again, I encourage you to pause this to continue writing. And then when you're done, coming back here to think about what it was like to fill out some of these responses. What did you notice? What showed up for you? Did you learn something new about yourself? Did anything surprise you? And feel free to hang on to this if you want to put it somewhere that you can see, if it feels like it will be an inspiration for you. Feel free to also share it with your individual therapist if you want to chat about some of your responses a little bit more in depth. All right, so I'm going to close out here. We are moving right along in our distress tolerance module. Last week, we discussed and reviewed the radical acceptance skills. So we talked about what radical acceptance is, how do we work on turning our mind towards acceptance. So just to recap, radical acceptance is all about accepting the reality of what might be going on in our lives. And as humans, we all go through different life experiences. Some are more challenging than others. And there are going to be times when there are things out of our control. So reality acceptance skills really help us work on trying to accept the situations or experiences that are happening. And the idea behind this is if we can accept what's happening, we can actually work towards healing and moving through our emotions, processing the grief that comes with acceptance. Because when we reject reality, we actually create more suffering for ourselves. So if you need a little bit more of a refresher, feel free to go back into last week's video and rewatch it. We are going to continue with reality acceptance skills. We're going to talk about 2 different concepts today, and we're going to focus a little bit on how can we work on accepting with our bodies. So that'll be the second half. So I'm going to refer to our workbook here so you can follow along with me. Hopefully you can see my screen. So the first concept that we're going to be talking about today is the idea of willingness versus willfulness. Willingness is allowing yourself to be ready for the possibilities of life, while willfulness holds you back from the life you want to live. And this idea of willingness is this like working on embracing the situation or accepting it, moving towards acceptance, as opposed to willfulness, which is this idea of rejecting reality. So we're going to talk a little bit about this a little bit more. All right, so what to know? Willingness is being open to the world, being open to what's going on. Again, as a reminder, because radical acceptance does not mean that we have to like or approve what's happening. It just means that we're working towards processing that or going through it. And this idea of willingness is being open to that idea, right? Being open to the world, being open to what's going on. Willingness is doing what is needed to move forward without dragging your feet, right? It's being willing to do the work, willing to try the skills. This idea that, like, all right, we're going to do it even if it's really hard. Whereas willfulness is the idea of dragging your feet like through the mud. It's just the resistance, it's the non-acceptance piece. Willingness is acting in alignment with your values, listening to your wise mind, and being effective. So that's like an example of how willingness can show up too. The opposite of willingness is willfulness, like I mentioned. Willingness is giving up and declining to do what is needed to move forward, is willfulness. Willfulness is trying to change and fix every situation when sometimes things do not need to be fixed. Or again, times that we might not be able to fix, right? Because there are going to be things that are out of our control. Willfulness is the need to always be in control and not letting go of that control, right? So, this idea of being in control or always being right, a lot of times that is us showing up as being willful and not being open to the idea that maybe there's other ways to look at a situation or other ways to approach it. Okay, so how can we practice this? The first step is just really noticing when we're experiencing willfulness. If you are not self-aware of being willful, it will make it hard to work towards acceptance. So we have to be able to name it and know that, oh, this is willfulness showing up. I'm noticing that resistance. I'm not ready to let go of this. So that's being aware of that and noticing that. Identify 3 core values that are important to you. Then ask yourself, and am I in alignment with these values? And do my actions support my values? So, this idea that, are we living within our values? Are we living with what's important to us? And if we're not, are we having a hard time with this idea of radical acceptance or with willfulness? We can go back to using our pros and cons skill. Remember, we learned that several weeks ago at the beginning of this module, weighing out the pros and cons of being open to change versus not being open or being willful to change, to think about what that looks like. That can be really helpful to just write everything out. What would be the pros and cons versus this? And then even thinking, again, if we're going back to that pros and cons skill, thinking about, are there any short-term or long-term consequences to each of the things that you've identified? And then another way to practice, and this is specifically with our body that we're going to talk about in a few moments here, is practicing willing hands and half smile as a way to practice accepting with your body. There's such a strong mind body connection. And so sometimes, if we're having a hard time or stuck points with our thoughts and with our mind, we can actually work on doing things to our body that is meant to send signals and messages to our brain to work towards acceptance because they go hand in hand. All right, let's talk about an example here. Imagine having a heavy weight that is sitting on your shoulders when you wake up in the morning. Think about moving through your day carrying this extra load on your shoulders and back, signifying the things that are literally weighing you down. Imagine choosing to just deal with the pain of that invisible dumbbell that is actually making things worse for you. This is willfulness, and it is getting in the way. Willingness is the concept of choosing to move the weight. Willingness is working every day to have the strength to keep moving the dumbbell off your chest. It is choosing to strengthen and condition your muscles so that day by day you are getting stronger to be able to lift the dumbbell off your back and put it behind you. So it is no longer a barrier in your day to day. So that I really like that example because I think it shows the difference of what it means to be willful, which is you're just like muscling through or just dealing with the invisible like pain or burden or what you're going through. And that ultimately creates more suffering, right? Where willingness is this idea to being open even if it's a little bit of a longer process to work on moving through, working towards change, working towards trying to use different strategies or techniques to move that weight, to move that burden, and for yourself to feel a little bit lighter. Okay. All right. So let's do like kind of a story time here to highlight this a little bit more. So Oliver, who uses he, him pronouns, is struggling with engaging in self-destructive behaviors that have led to getting in trouble both at home and at school. His parents decided to sign him up for therapy, which is the first time he has ever tried talking with someone. Oliver did not want to go in person and instead agreed to try virtual sessions. When it was time for the session, Oliver declined to get out of bed, log into the session, and/or talk to the therapist over the phone. Oliver was being willful to the idea of change and getting support. He was stuck in ineffective coping patterns and not willing to let go of the destructive behaviors to try new ways of healing. If Oliver were more open to practice willingness, he could have sat up in bed, turned on his computer, and logged into the session and turned his camera on to meet the therapist and see if it was a good match. So again, highlighting the differences of what that looks like, willfulness versus willingness, right? And I like this idea, the concept of going to therapy, because ultimately going to therapy is hard, as well as not going to therapy if you are really struggling. That's also really hard. And that might be us choosing to stay stuck in where we are and willfulness showing up for us, as opposed to willingness might be even if we don't want to go to therapy, even if it feels really hard, still showing up and doing the work. Okay. All right. So here are some ways that you can practice this at home this week. So you can do this by yourself by thinking of a situation you find challenging to accept. Write down one action you can take to be more open and willing to do things to accept and let go. Can do this with a peer by sharing the dumbbell metaphor with a friend. Discuss other metaphors that may help one another understand the concept of willingness versus willfulness that may empower change. And then you can do this with a parent or caregiver by talking to your parent about the concept of willingness versus willfulness. Share a challenging situation where you find it hard to accept. Ask for their guidance on ways you can practice being more willing and open to accept the challenges you are facing. And then throughout the week, you can write down some of these responses as a way to process and reflect how it went. So share how you practice willingness with either yourself, a peer, or a caregiver this week. And then you're reflecting on, was it effective? What did you notice? What was different when practicing willingness? Then you're just noting how you felt before and after trying this skill. Okay. We're going to move on to the next part, which, as I mentioned in the beginning of our video, talking about how we can work on accepting with our bodies. So we're going to actually have a moment here to practice a little bit of willingness. This idea might feel a little different or funny or strange. And so I want to maybe see if we can put those opinions or thoughts about today's skill aside and see if we can practice embracing willingness to try something new, because this might be a really new and unique skill for folks. Okay, so half smile and willing hands. And this is all about practicing ways to work on adapting a willing posture to practice acceptance through your body. All right, so what do we need to know here? Half smiling is turning the corners of your lips slightly upward. Half smiling is almost like an incognito smile. You almost don't even recognize it as there. One kind of example that I like to share with folks is that if you almost think about the Mona Lisa painting that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, she's not quite grinning ear to ear, right? She doesn't have this full on affect. However, her facial expression looks calm, serene, face looks relaxed, and you can almost see in the very corners of her mouth the smile, like the corners of her mouth slightly upwards. So that is this idea of half smiling. It's this idea that we're practicing, like the name, a half smile. We don't, again, it doesn't have to be a full grin, a huge smile plastered on our face. It's just actually practicing relaxing your facial muscles, especially like your jaw. A lot of times when we're tense or anxious, we might be clenching our jaw. So working on just trying to relax our jaw muscles and just trying to adapt a really tiny, slight smile with the corners of your mouth. We're going to practice. Willing hands is the next part. And this is turning the palms of your hands up towards the sky. Excuse me. It is allowing your hands to symbolize a more open stance. It's this idea that we are trying to be open with our bodies, right? I'm sure you've heard before, sometimes when we're like crossing our arms, it can almost appear like a closed off position. So we want to do the opposite, uncross our arms and our wrists, having our palms facing up. So you can do this a lot of different ways by laying down, sitting, standing, just having your palms facing out and upward. By practicing willing hands and half smiles, the body communicates to the brain to begin letting go and receive openness. And this is the science behind it. Again, there's such a strong mind body connection. And when we're doing things with our bodies, our we're sending signals, the neurons are firing off to our brain to help communicate what's going on in our body. And vice versa, things going on in our mind are going to be sending signals to our body. It's that two-way pathway. All right. How to practice. Practice looking in the mirror and ever so slightly turning the corners of your mouth upward. It may feel awkward at first. That is okay. Keep practicing. That's why I said in the beginning when we started this that this is a great chance to practice willingness because this is going to be something that most likely is going to be new for folks. And I know the initial thought of it sounds a little strange or weird, but it says this idea of practicing. I will say from doing this for multiple years now and working with clients, a lot of times clients have found this to be a really helpful and effective skill when they've been able to practice on their own. So definitely give it a try. Channel in your inner Mona Lisa. Think, settle, soft smile. When sitting down, rest the back of your hands on your thighs to have your palms facing to the ceiling. You can do this again, laying down, sitting up, or even standing. Give it a try. Okay. So before we move on to example or story time, I just want everyone to take a moment to practice this together. So wherever you are, finding a comfortable position. I am sitting down. I actually have my legs crisscrossed and I'm going to have my palms facing up right on top of like my knees. So you do what feels good for you. If you want to try laying down, sitting in a comfortable position, you can close your eyes for this. And then just start to slowly relax your facial muscles. And ever so slightly start to engage in a really soft smile. So I'm doing this here along with you. And you're just going to adapt that soft smile. And we're just going to hold it for a few moments. Two more breaths here. Okay. So I want you to just take a moment to reflect, like, how did that feel in your body? I know for me, when I practice this, I always feel a little bit more grounded and grounded in the ability to make a decision about acceptance or feeling like I'm coming from a little bit of a calmer place and trying to figure out how to move forward. Okay, so let's talk about an example here. Have you ever been to a yoga class? If so, the final pose in yoga is called Shavasana. It is when you lie down on your mat, eyes closed, with legs to the corners of your mat and your arms by your side with your palms up. It is intended to be the final release. This is an example of the final acceptance and release with having an open body posture. So this even is tied to like this, the creator of DBT, Marshall Linehan, did not just make this skill up and pull it out of thin air. It is rooted and tied to even like other practices today. Like when you think about yoga and um, has a really like long ancient history too. So this idea of a final release, acceptance, that surrender is that final pose and your palms are facing up. All right. Taking an open posture can also be as simple as uncrossing your arms and legs. This helps communicate to your brain that you are safe. Think about how trying these small motions in your body could help with things like getting stuck in traffic, getting out of bed in the morning to go to school, doing homework that is boring or difficult, etc. I want to practice this one more time, and I'm going to invite you to take maybe a different type of open posture. So if you were sitting, maybe this time you lay down or stand up, but do something different than we just practiced. And practice having your arms open, half smiling again, relaxing those facial muscles. And this time I want you to truly think about something that is difficult for you to accept. So go ahead when you're ready, transition to that open body posture, palms facing up, away from you towards the ceiling, slowly turning the corners of your mouth up and channeling in the thing that is difficult for you to accept. We're going to take 3 breaths in this position. Inhale through your nose. Exhale, let it go. Inhale, fill up. Exhale, sigh it out. One more time. Inhale, fill up. Exhale, release. All right. Again, just take a moment to reflect. How did that go? What did you notice? Was there any movement or wiggle room in the thing that you're having a hard time accepting? This might be a skill that you have to practice multiple times, maybe longer. For sake of time, I did it pretty short or a short practice together. So you might have to extend that a little bit longer. Okay. All right. Story time. Andy, she, her, experienced a difficult loss last year in losing her family pet. She has been working through her own grief and going to therapy. Andy struggles when she goes to her best friend Sophia's house because Sophia has a dog that looks just like hers. Her therapist taught her how to do willing hands and half smile to practice when she is over Sophia's house. At first, Andy thought the skill was pointless and made no sense. How was smiling and placing her palms upwards supposed to help with accepting the reality of her pain? Andy was skeptical, but tried it later that week. Sophia went to the bathroom and Andy sat on her bed. She closed her eyes, turned the corners of her mouth upwards, and faced the palms of her hands up to the sky. She took a few deep breaths in this position. She noticed that after a few moments, her body seemed to ease a bit and she wasn't holding as much tension in her shoulders. Although she was still experiencing sadness, she felt a sense of inner calmness that she had not felt before at Sophia's since her dog had passed away. Andy made a small note to continue practicing this skill as she was feeling more hopeful about practicing acceptance. Right. So that's just another example of somebody practicing this, even for a few moments in real time when having a hard time with acceptance. All right. So here are some ways and examples of how you can practice this. Can do this by yourself by thinking of a situation you find challenging to accept. Write down one action you can take to be more open and willing to do things to accept and let go. Similar to, oh, these are the same things from the last time. I guess just how to change this up a little bit for this skill. But maybe with a peer, trying showing them what you're doing, showing them half smile and willingness or willing hands, and practicing it together. Practicing it with maybe there's something that you're both experiencing, like a communal experience that's hard to work through. And so you just practice together. And then with a parent, talk about it with them. Share what you learned in this video. See if they've ever practiced something like this. And then maybe again, similar to practicing with a peer, you try it together. Okay. Over this week, share how you practice willing hands and half smile with either yourself, a peer, or a caregiver this week. Was it effective? What did you notice? What was different when practicing willing hands and half smile? And then how did you feel before and after practicing willing hands and half smile? Okay. So that concludes our skill for this week. If you have any questions, feel free to ask your individual therapist, bring it to your next group, and come prepared to your next group with practicing this skill. If there's any barriers, they will be happy to help troubleshoot those.